Science TV. Today we are going to be talking about challenges. There are many challenges in life. Part of being a member of Christ is understanding that God puts tests in us to challenge our faith towards Him. There are some times where there are small challenges and other times where there are big challenges. If we overcome these challenges, God will elevate us to the next level of service in His kingdom. He'll also become closer to us. If we do not pass His test, He still will be with us, but we will need to be broken down and built back up again before the Lord can test us once again. In the Bible, both men and women have tests that they either pass or fail. I've also experienced these tests myself. I'm going to show you the proof using Daniel, Ruth, Jonah, and Eve from the Bible and my own test that I've experienced. Daniel was a strong man of God that was destined for the king's service after his people have been conquered by Babylon. In the Bible, he was faced with a few challenges. The first challenge we pick up is in Daniel chapter 1, verses 8 to 15. It says, "But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with royal food and wine. He asked the chief official for permission to not defile himself in this way. Now God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel. But the official told Daniel, 'I am afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king would have my head because of you.' Daniel then said to the guard, whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Mishael and Azariah, 'Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Compare our appearance with of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see.' He agreed to this and tested him for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate royal food. Daniel knew that God was testing him in this area. I'm sure it would have been nice to live with the nice food. Daniel knew God was greater than any nourishment that was able to be given. This is why he was not afraid to make this challenge towards the official that was in charge of him. There it also worked out that God controlled the people that Daniel could not. In verse 15, the Bible shows that Daniel passed the test which God put towards him. The result of this was Daniel being elevated into the king's service. This happens a bit later in the chapter. Daniel had more than one test that he had to face in the Bible. The second chapter, Daniel went for round 2 and God testing him. This test lasted a good part of the chapter. What happened was King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. He could not remember the dream. In his rage, he ordered rage, he ordered the wise men to be executed who could not tell him what the dream was and what the dream meant. Daniel could have said he is not a wise man, but he put himself in danger while these executions were going on. Daniel put his faith in God and told the king that through the glory of God he'd be able to tell him the dream and interpret the dream for him. God sometimes calls us to put our lives on the line for his sake. This for Daniel was definitely one of those times. He accepted the challenge, and when it was over, God elevated Daniel to chief of all the wise men in the land. This is another case where elevation happens after your faith in God is tested. Daniel went on to face other tests and pass. Each time he was elevated to a new high in the king's service. In the Bible it shows that men are not the only people that can experience a test from God and pass. The next person I want to demonstrate is Ruth. Ruth is a female character in the Bible that is eventually responsible for the birth of Jesus. This happens quite a few generations later. Ruth would have been the great-grandmother to David. The first test happens in Ruth 1:15-18. It says, "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or turn my back from you. Where you will go, I will go. Where you will stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you will die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me ever so severely if death separates you and me." When Naomi realized Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. As you can see here, this was a test for Ruth to declare her faith towards God. There is clear evidence that Ruth was being built up until that point in her life. This test was loyalty. Even though there was not much to go back to, God had a plan for her and built her up when she arrived at her destination. God sometimes calls us to support ones we care about and follow the people we are connected to, who are connected to God, even if they're down on their luck. This was a test Ruth passed with flying colors. She got to her destination in time for the harvest. Ruth was called into service of Naomi, her mother-in-law, in chapter 2. We see the service that she had to do. God was building up her faith. She put forth a testing that God would make sure no person would persecute her while she was getting the scraps from the harvest. Showing faith in God was a way that Ruth was elevated into God's service. Ruth was testing God and his loyalty towards Naomi and her. In a way, this was a test towards Ruth as well. She had to put 100% faith in God because there was no other option. There is another test that Ruth had to endure in chapter 3. This was a test to see Ruth's faith in other people. Ruth had to trust her faith in Boaz. Boaz was a person of considerable noble character. In the family, it was his role to restore the loss of land of family members. This family applied to Naomi. He had restoration ability in which Ruth and Naomi had none, because they had been away in another country all this time. Ruth had to put faith in God, that God will work through Boaz to make sure everything is taken care of for Ruth and Naomi. This is a very hard and significant test. This is one that Ruth did not pass with flying colors, like she did the first time. But God had put Naomi in her life to keep patience. If this eventually allowed Boaz to restore Naomi and take Ruth as his wife. Without these happenings, God would have needed a different plan to bring Jesus into the world. The next person we're going to be talking about is Jonah. Jonah is a person that God tested and failed his test. He is a person that shows he is a man of God that has his own selfish ambitions. You can see him fail his test in Jonah 1, verses 1 to 6, where it says, "The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me." But Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed for Tarshish. He went down to Joppa, where he had found a ship bound for that port. After paying his fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord. The Lord sent a great wind upon the sea, and such a violent storm arose, and the ship threatened to be broken up. All the sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his own God. They threw the cargo into the sea to lighten the ship. But Jonah was below deck, where he lay down and fell into a deep sleep. The captain went to him and said, "How can you sleep? Get up and call on your God. Maybe he will take notice and we will not perish." No matter what happens, God is always with us. Jonah tried to run away from God and not do what he was required to do. Jonah was pushed overboard at his request because he knew he was the cause of the ship being in trouble. Jonah needed to be humbled. In Jonah 1:17, he does just that. It's where it says, "Now the Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly for 3 days and 3 nights." This was solitary confinement for Jonah. God needed to break Jonah down and build him back up again. This is the way that God had to do it. It was done quickly, but it was done. This is a one showing where God will break us down before he builds us up again. In this case, God tested Jonah after building him up, and he passed. Yeah, this was his second test. In life, there are times where God builds us up to the same test after failing. In chapter 2, this is exactly what happened. Sometimes there are challenges in life that can appear insignificant, but are quite significant. This is what happened in our final case study. The final case study is of Eve. Eve was the first woman of God. Sometimes God will put obstacles in front of you. Genesis 3, 1-4 says, "Now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, 'Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden?' The woman said to the serpent, 'We may eat fruit from trees in the garden, but God did say, you must not eat fruit from the tree in the middle of the garden. You must not touch it, or you will die.' 'You will certainly not die,' the serpent said to the woman. 'For God knows when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened. You will be like God, knowing good and evil.'" The lies someone else was telling Eve was the obstacle put in front of her. This one came in the form of a serpent. The devil can attack many ways, and this is the vessel he used to attack Eve. Even though temptation exists, we can make a choice to follow God or not. I'm sure if Eve said, "No, I'm going to ask God about this knowledge," God would have been more than happy to give it. Eve made the wrong decision here because the desire of knowledge and the temptation of the fruit. Evidence of this can be found in Genesis 3, 6-7, where it says, "The woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom. She took it and ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves." Now God had to punish her because of what she did. Adam was in it too, but I am focusing on Eve here. In this case, the full glory of God could not be restored because the sin at that point was where there was no going back. God was still with Eve in this disobedience. The consequences can be found in Genesis 3:16, where it says, "To the woman he said, I will make your pains in childbearing very severe. With painful labor, you will give birth to children, and your desire will be for your husband. He will rule over you." God had also banished her from the Garden of Eden. God also provided garments rather than the fig leaves that they had before. This shows that God still cares for them, but he had to hold them accountable. Eve was still built back up, but she became the mother of the world. God still built her back up, but had to be different than previously planned. Sometimes after doing something that goes against God, God will do the same thing in our lives. This terminology can apply to real life. I've experienced times where God has grown in me when I passed the test, and times where He had to build me back up again. I want to use two examples of a pass and one example of a time that I did not pass. The first example I want to use for success is the time when I was suicidal. I have said I was suicidal. I was suicidal at one point in a previous sermon that I have done. God put someone into my life and make sure I'd never feel alone. The time I felt really lonely and was about to go through the worst of the suicidal thoughts. At the worst time, I challenged God to show He existed, or show me He existed. He gave me the exact sign I was looking for. A year later, I was tested. I was being built up and gaining independence up to that point in my life. God knew I was ready for the test. I went through a depressed state a year later, only this time I did not feel lonely. I knew I had a good friend. And when I got through it, I got pneumonia. This is the test that God put towards me. There is a cure for pneumonia, but I had to go see a doctor to get this cure. My own immune system was not enough. Even though I was not a Christian at this time, I had passed God's test. From there, He proceeded to show me how to become a better person and to have more faith in myself. He showed me even more friends who liked me for me and no one else. I felt enriched, and looking back, this was a small sample of things to come in my life. The second test I want to discuss is when I had come to God with my faith, and it was starting to increase. I had been baptized earlier that year. There can be many reasons why you go to church for the first time. For me, it was a crush on a girl. She looked pretty to me, and she went to church. I also liked her sense of morals. 6 months after I got baptized, God sent me a test. This is one I admit I did not pass with flying colors. I was piggybacking someone else's faith. This faith was hers, not mine. God's test towards me was, can you make your faith your faith? The feelings I had for her, she did not have for me. There, I could have done one of two things. Be mad at the world or come to God for my and make any of my Christian faith my faith and no one else's. After that night of blaming Him for leading me down this path, the next morning there was a certain peace that came over me, and I was able to get going with my regular life. I was on vacation when this happened to me. I was ready to start my vacation. I had to go back to work in 2 days. God elevated me mentally and spiritually. People around me could not understand the positive energy that I felt. It did take time over the next few months. I was laid off from my old job, and I had found a new job. This new job was a lot more fulfilling than my previous job. This one I felt more freedom, and I was able to fix something that was broken rather than try and live up to someone else's expectations. This was a great job. I was able to see solutions to troubles and fix them. That being said, I was in a more positive mental state when I passed the test. God elevated me to a different direction in my life, and one that I enjoyed much more. There are times in my life where I had a test and I failed as well. It is law that you have to drive your car with insurance. It is law here where I live. At one time in my life, I did not. This is partially because I could not pay for the insurance. That being said, I had no business driving the car. As a result, the car was taken away from me when I got it into an accident. This was God taking my car away. He did have to build me up again. God had to show me the laws of the land and always obey them unless God tells you different. I would make sure I had insurance before I drove the vehicle again. I also had to pay for part of the repair work. It took me a number of years, but the car I did lose, He gave it back to me again. There were many times I could have lost the car, but God was gracious. He gave me a chance to work on paying my car off, and I did get the car back. This is a little taste of how Jonah must have felt when he had to face his consequences for his actions. This is a challenge I've passed, but I can see how God holds us accountable for our actions. As you can see, God tests us. I hope this helps you better understand God and how He tests us, no matter what. Go in peace and let God bless you in your future endeavors. Lord, I pray for the people watching this video. Show them your presence and be with them in any challenges they may face. Amen.